Good evening. Let's call this work session of the Common Council to order. May we have roll call, please?
Mayor Gates.
Here.
Vice Mayor Miles.
Here.
Councilmember Kress.
Here.
Councilmember Lingenfelter.
Here.
Councilmember Scott Staley.
Present.
Councilmember Waite.
Here.
Councilmember Yocum.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. All work session items listed are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. The primary purpose of the work session meetings is to provide the City Council with the opportunity for in-depth discussion and study of specific subjects. Public comment is not provided for on the agenda and may be made only as approved by consensus of the Council. In appropriate circumstances, a brief presentation may be permitted by a member of the public or another interested party on an agenda item, if invited by the mayor or city manager to do so. The mayor may limit or end the time for such presentations. I know you've had the opportunity to review the presentations and understanding that there's a lot of information we're going to be looking at in the next hour and a half. I would ask council to kindly reserve their questions or comments to the end, until the end of the presentation, which is divided in 3 parts. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you. Before Greg starts, I just would like to make a few comments, Mayor Gates, members of council. As I think most people are aware, the subject of I-40 interchanges is a long-standing topic in the city. Rancho Santa Fe was first identified in the 1971 general plan. Beale Street is about 25 years in the discussion / action stages, and Kingman Crossing is more than a decade old. This city council has indicated for the entire time it's been together that it's committed to seeing that all 3 of those interchanges are built, and has further taken the step last fall of consolidating the Rancho Santa Fe and the Kingman Crossing project into one known as the I-11 project. The purposes of tonight are twofold. First, would like you to meet the team that's been assembled by the city. I would tell you that as somebody who's done this before, this is an excellent team. You should all be very comfortable and pleased with the team that's been presented. You're going to hear from each of them tonight. The second thing is to identify what to myself and the team are the critical next steps, or if you will, 3 key decisions. The first is to decide with respect to the Kingman Crossing and Rancho Santa Fe interchanges, what it is exactly that you would like to have built. That's known as the scope of work. But for all the conversation, amazingly, we haven't ever gotten to that decision. So that leads to a lot of confusion, because some people have elements in, some people have elements out, some people have all the elements that could possibly ever be in, some people have a completely different list. So it's really important that as soon as practicable, this council makes a decision on scope. Closely related to that is to decide how these projects will be built. That's known as the delivery system. There are 3, and you've probably had briefings about this before I joined the staff. The classic one is design, bid, build. Then there's design, build, and then there's construction manager at risk, or CMAR. I've talked to most of you about your preferences on the delivery system, and while you have expressed those to me individually, there's no record that the City Council has ever taken a vote, if you will, on what your preferred delivery system is. And then third, to decide how the scope of work and the delivery system are going to be paid for, otherwise known as the financing portion. And Greg's going to be the first of 4 speakers tonight that help you address that. Let me add by identifying a step that the city's not going to do. The city has no intention of becoming the developer of its own property. I've been here 4 months, and I think once a week I hear from at least somebody who is either very excited or very concerned that the city is going to develop the property that it owns on the south side of the Kingman Crossing interchange location. The city council and the city manager that's here right now has no intention of doing that. That does not mean that the city is unwilling to entertain offers to sell that property to someone in the future, but the notion that the city is somehow going to be the real estate developer for a retail project is something that's simply not on the table, not in the recent past, not today, and not in the future either. So with those introductory comments, and hopefully without stealing a lot of Greg's slides, I'd like to introduce you to our city engineer, Greg Henry, who's going to give a brief history of each of these three interchanges, so we all are working from the same set of information. Here's Greg.
Good evening. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mayor and Council. As Jim indicated, I'm going to be given the history and status of the three proposed interchange projects on I-40 here in Kingman. And we have a fairly long presentation, so without further ado, I will just jump right in. The slide you have here shows the three projects in question. I-40 US 93 West Kingman TI is an ADOT project. They currently have money in their current 5-year plan to fund this design and right-of-way. Second is the Kingman Crossing traffic interchange, and third is the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway traffic interchange. I have a map here showing the location of these interchanges. West Kingman TI located at the current Beale Street TI with I-40. Of course, we have Stockton and Andy, that no construction proposed on those, so other than just to show you the reference on the map, I included them for that reason alone. And then the Kingman Crossing and the Rancho Santa Fe TI on the east part of Kingman there. So starting with the I-40 US 93 West Kingman traffic interchange, the general one-sentence project scope for this is ADOT's proposing to construct a high-speed system connection between I-40 and US 93 to alleviate the traffic flow and congestion and enhance regional traffic flow between Phoenix and Las Vegas. The slide here shows the proposed alignment in blue. It shows also the location of the existing Beale interchange, which will remain. It will remain a functional interchange. Basically, the new alignment will allow cars to bypass the commercial area and head straight north or south, depending on their direction of travel, and avoid that commercial section of 93 there. As Jim indicated, the history goes back almost some 25 years. The first report that I could find that indicated anything about the project need was July 1993 traffic assessment of the current proposed interchange and the traffic operations at that interchange. The report basically discussed that at some point there would be a needed new type of interchange or new connection between 40 and 93. They were having traffic problems back then with trucks and as bad as, or as worse as is today. July 1996, ADOT prepared a multi-modal corridor profile study. They recommended in that study a new connection between I-40 and US 93. There was public meetings in Kingman in November 1995 and June 1996 to discuss that report. And then ADOT prepared another multimodal corridor profile study, which further identified the need for the bypass or freeway type interchange. Basically, constructing a new free flow traffic system between I-40 and 93, which bypasses the commercial area. ADOT held some public meetings. They held project scoping meetings in 2007, 2008, and they held another public meeting in March of 2008 here in Kingman. In October 2009, they completed the final feasibility report. That report showed 8 possible corridors for the new alignment. They further evaluated those 8 corridors and recommended 2, including the one that I showed on the previous slide. which is the current proposal to make that system connection. So between 2011 and 2018, ADOT has prepared additional project scoping, alternative analysis, environmental studies, and a design concept report. I've not seen the final design concept report. I understand there's still some environmental studies that they're completing to finalize that, but I have a draft of that report. And at this point, ADOT has $5 million in their current fiscal year here to begin design of the system interchange. Their 5-year plan also shows in 2020 a $10 million placeholder for right-of-way acquisition. They're assuming the design is going to take 2 years to complete, and then they'll have additional time and money to acquire all the right-of-way that is required. Finally, the future, Alvin Stump, the district engineer, indicated that they are proposing to place $55 million in the construction budget in the fiscal year 2024 for the project. So it seems like it's pretty safe at this point to say that project is gonna go. They have $5 million in design, and they're proposing $10 million for right-of-way and $55 million for construction. I would have stopped there and asked if there's any questions, but the mayor said to keep going, so I'll move into Kingman Crossing here now. And I think you probably know this, but the general concept here is to construct a new traffic interchange on I-40. Its location south of the hospital, adjacent to the city of Kingman, owned 168 acres on the south side of 40. Construct the interchange and arterial connecting roads to promote and facilitate commercial development, public safety response times, and traffic circulation in the area. This map just kind of shows the interchange in light blue and the proposed arterial connecting roads in red. These would be essentially the minimum connecting roads that would be required for the interchange to go in to have the access on both sides of I-40. The history for this interchange goes back to 2006 when the city hired URS Corporation to prepare a design concept report, change of access report, and the associated environmental documents, and as well as 30% engineering design documents. And I just put a note in there that URS was acquired by AECom Technical Services in 2014. Because you'll see the name AECom come up here a little bit later on. February 2010, the FHWA change of access report was approved. It was approved for access to the north side of I-40 only at that time. Final design concept came a few months later in June of 2010. Then, as a result of some concerns from citizens and traffic flow and concerns from the council on public safety response to seeing if there's a possible way to build a connecting road across I-40 without access, in August of 2015, the city hired AECom to prepare that feasibility study to look at potential crossings of I-40, with one at Prospector Street and one at Kingman Crossing Boulevard at its current location where the proposed TI is located. Again, no access to I-40 was proposed in that feasibility. It was completed in June of 2016. And then in January of 2017, the council again hired AECom to design Kingman Crossing Boulevard from Southern Avenue to Interstate 40. The idea was that perhaps there would be developer participation to build the interchange and the roadways north side of I-40, but that the city was going to be responsible for the design of the roadway south of I-40. That design is still under contract with AECom. We're currently at the 90% plan stage. That contract also includes updating and amending the change of access report to include access to both north and south side of the interstate. That change of access report has been submitted to ADOT, and I believe it's still in their review. We would hope to get something back from them soon. Then in October of 2017, the council created the I-11 East Kingman Connection Project, wherein they basically combine the Kingman Crossing TI and the Rancho Parkway TI into one project, and discussed hiring a program manager to manage that project, and we'll get into more detail on that real soon here. I just wanted to put the next steps here. The next steps for the Kingman Crossing would be to complete the design of the TI and the arterial roadways. And again, as I've mentioned, we have 90% plans for Kingman Crossing Boulevard on the south side of I-40. The TI is currently at the 30% design. The roadway, that includes the roadway Kingman Crossing Boulevard between I-40 and Santa Rosa. The other arterial roadways that were identified would be Santa Rosa, improvements to Santa Rosa and Prospector. There's been no no initiation of design on those roads at this point. Then also identify and secure the right-of-way. The City Council has taken our step on this earlier this month when we approved the final plat for the Kingman Crossing South. Those right-of-ways are dedicated to the public. The right-of-ways I'm speaking of for the interchange on the south side of 40, and as well as the Kingman Crossing Boulevard. We are also in the process to obtain right-of-way from the state trust land, state section 16. Basically, that's the land between Airfield Avenue and Southern Avenue. We're supposed to go to public auction here sometime, and following the process that's required by statute there within the next month or two. Again, update the FHWA change of access report that's already in the works, and then the big one, develop and implement construction funding for the project. And I'll keep moving along to Rancho Parkway. Project scope is real similar to Kingman Crossing, with the exception that we have some industrial development and access to the airport added in addition to the commercial and traffic circulation that this interchange will help and facilitate. This is a general map showing, and it's always hard to get a large map on a PowerPoint like this, so I had to cut it off on the top there. But basically, we've got the interchange, Kingman Crossing Boulevard connecting to Louise Avenue on the south there, a connection to Santa Rosa Drive, which would be extended back to Prospector Street, and then a connection to Airway Avenue, which would be connected to just a little bit east of Prospector Street, and then to the north, a connection to the Industrial Boulevard at the airport park there. The history of this, as Jim indicated, goes back many years. It was shown not quite in its current alignment on the general plan back in 1971, but at that time they were considering the need for a parkway type connection between Walpi Mountain Road and the airport with access to I-40. It was discussed in a Kingman transportation study from November 1980. And then the city actually formally hired a consultant to conduct an interchange assessment at its present location back in 1998, 1999. From thenceforth, it's been shown and identified in all of the Kingman area transportation study updates beginning in 2005 and all the preceding ones that have followed. June 2005, ADOT programmed $500,000 for a design concept report, and URS was selected as the engineer to prepare that design concept report, which also included the change of access report, environmental documents, and traffic studies that are required for access to the interstate. Then again, in June of 2005, the city signed a development agreement with property owners immediately north and south of the proposed Rancho Parkway interchange. That development agreement, which was approved under ordinance number 1485, included property owners agreeing to certain rezoning and right-of-way dedications in the interchange location there. Those dedications never took place, so that development agreement would have to be revisited, updated, or started anew again in order for that to occur. It's since expired. February 2006, the city signed a letter of intent with Arizona Department of Transportation. That letter of intent identified a 70-30% split from the state to the city, and that was approved by the council under Resolution 4249. In October of 2007, EORS completed the final DCR. And then ADOT decided to hire them to prepare design plans based on the design concept report. They were hired to complete plans up to the 95% stage, and then they were put on the shelf at that point because funding had fallen away. And then in June of 2009, the name, I put this in here because some people still call it Rattlesnake, and it was formally changed under Resolution 4605 from Rattlesnake to Rancho Santa Fe Parkway. In 2009, ADOT had 18 million. They showed 18 million construction funding dollars on their 5-year plan. And then those dollars were diminished because of the Great Recession that occurred in 07, 08, and continued into 09. And ADOT only showed 5 million on their plan between 2010 and 2012. After 2012, they showed nothing. Then in June 2011, the 95% plans were complete. And the city has, essentially since the project conception, shown on our capital improvement projects an unfunded placeholder for the project. And again, council established, created the I-11 East Kingman Connection Project, whereby the Kingman Crossing Rancho Parkway TIs were combined into one project. Kind of leads us into our program manager, but at this point, we have general scope of the program manager here for council review and hopefully provide future action here sometime, maybe by April, to hire the program manager. Next steps for Rancho Parkway would be complete the design of the TI and arterial roadways. Again, they're 95% complete, so it should be fairly minimal effort to complete the design for the Rancho Parkway, Rancho Santa Fe Parkway and the TI. There's been no design started on the arterial connecting roadways for Airway Avenue or Santa Rosa Boulevard at this point. So identify and secure the right-of-way is key. Update the change of access report. Report is more than 10 years old, and the federal highway is requiring an update. Basically, they want to review the traffic models to make sure that the design concept still works as it was presented back 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And of course, again, the other big one, develop and implement the construction funding for the TI and the connecting roadways. And I'm just leading right into our program manager discussion here, and I just wanted to point out there's 3 key things that I think are important from the program manager that the council should consider, and that would be complete the project needs assessment, essentially the scope of work, what's required, whether we need to update the traffic models, update the change of access report, determine whether we need 5-lane arterial connecting roadways or whether we can get by with 2-lane arterial connecting roadways at this point. And update, and along with that, update the construction numbers. There's certainly a fairly large discrepancy in the numbers that have been floated to council between 85 and 110 million. So that's certainly key, is updating those construction estimates, and obviously any financing should be based on some pretty good estimates. So, and then also we have talked about identifying and recommending procurement method for construction. There's been the talk of design build, CM at risk. Council's heard both. They had presentations last fall from both Alvin Stump, who indicated that ADOT was more in favor of the CM at risk, and there was presentations indicating that design build should be the option. And as Jim has mentioned, we shouldn't throw out design bid build at this point either if it can save some money. So the program manager has in their scope to provide some information and recommendations on the procurement of the project. So that's all I had for the history and update. Any questions?
Thank you, Craig. So the next person to introduce his part of the engineering team is Sam Ellers from Matrix. And what Greg just finished on in terms of the vehicle, the service delivery vehicle, is something that I want to talk about. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's been a lot of conversation about a preferred alternative, one over the other, but the council hasn't decided. Sam's initial presentation or submission to the city indicated that we were still open to all three. If that's not in fact the case, and this council's ready to decide that they want to choose one over the other two, then that makes things easier for everybody, because then we know what the answer to that is. If you're still interested in having Matrix do that comparative analytic, then let us know, and that'll take us in a little different direction. But that's key point number one. Key point number two actually goes back to Greg's showing of the maps when he talked about, scoping, and that gets into questions that the Matrix team is more than able and capable of addressing, which is, do we really need to build all of those? If we need to build one segment, do we need to do it now, or could we wait for future development? All sorts of questions like that get into scoping. So here to introduce the Matrix team is Sam, and at least one member of his team is in the room tonight. Sam?
If I may, Mayor, let me just, I know we all know Sam, but I just wanted to introduce him. Sam began his career in Kingman in 1986. He was the Assistant County Engineer for Mahomet County Public Works. And after that, he left that job in '99 and went to work as the ADOT District Engineer here in Kingman. And after that, he even went up further and became the State Engineer. So he's got a good background here in Kingman. He's got an excellent background with ADOT. And I know you all know who he is, but I wanted to point that out. So without further ado, Sam Felters.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Sam Alters. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Very thrilled and excited to be back in Kingman and to work with you. And thank you for selecting us to help deliver this project. I lived in Kingman for more than 20 years. They were great. We raised our kids here, and Kingman will always be home. In fact, we still own our home in Kingman today. So with that said, you've heard from Jim, you heard from Greg, the history of these projects. Without bragging, let me just say, when I was the district engineer for the Kingman district, I presented to the then Kingman City Council on the need and value for a traffic interchange on I-40 east of Kingman. At that time, we called it Rattlesnake TI, and went down to the Transportation Board and made a presentation to them as well. In fact, I invited them to come up. I remember standing along the shoulder and pointing to them where that would be. And that indeed led to the letter that was referenced, the 7030, the IGA that followed. And unfortunately, we hear often that a transportation project take a long time to deliver, and on an average 15 or more years. Well, this project here is really not unique that it's taken that long. I do hope that with your leadership and the team that we have in place, we can move this project forward to make it a reality. So I put this slide. I just wanted to spend really just a quick moment to tell you that we, our team as a whole, understand the value of this project. We truly believe this is key to prosperity and economic development for the city going forward. This project that we were selected to provide program management services for consists of 2 traffic interchanges, as you heard from both city manager and city engineer. at the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway and Kingman Crossing. We truly believe, and I understand, again, from my past involvement with it, that this will provide better connectivity and mobility, both TIs. It will enhance access and safety, and will also promote economic development, all of which are very important to prosperity at the city. Whoops. City manager touched base on the team. I really want you to know that this team was assembled for this project and tailored for this program services task. Again, you heard about my background and what I've done, both here in Kingman as the district engineer and then state engineer for ADOT. I had other stops as a chief engineer for toll roads in Orange County, California, and then returned to Arizona and went into the private sector. I was a district manager for another firm where I led both the practice in both Arizona and Nevada for them before I joined this company. Not only I bring some experience, I truly bring passion and personal connection and ownership to this project. But as you will hear, and I do want to, I didn't want to do it earlier, I wanted to do it at the proper time. I want to introduce one of the team members who's key for sure, and I don't think he's going to be new to you. It's Dale Wiggins. Dale is in the audience. He has worked with you. You've met him. Dale has a lot of experience in both design and design bid build as well as design build, and knows this area and has worked on these projects over time. He truly brings a real connection to them. And additionally, Dale does work for AECOM. Along with Dale, we selected Josiah Roberts. He's got about 25 years of experience. He is not here tonight, but Josiah will lead the design build effort should the council decide to go in that direction. He just finished a project for ADOT where AECOM and Josiah, on behalf of the company, AECOM was the general engineering consultant, similar to the program management services that we're providing here, was on the US 60 Grand Avenue and Bell Road. So additionally, on the team we have Steve Basella. Steve is with Infrastructure Mavens. Steve was handpicked simply because he served as an estimator, chief estimator, and a president of a large construction company that built many of the freeway segments in the valley, and I can attest to that because I was the state engineer when that was happening. They were very capable, very successful, retired a few years ago, established this firm, and what he will bring is more just than estimation. He'll bring a true insight into constructability reviews and the cost of elements and how they get constructed and how that impacts the cost. Additionally, because we do have quite a few parcels that will be impacted by right-of-way acquisition, we have Tierra right-of-way on the team as well. Tierra is very familiar with ADOT and federal highway processes, and right-of-way acquisition is key because there are some, if there are federal dollars involved, it's likely to require certain process be followed. And when you ask ADOT to contribute, and I think it's perfectly justified request, they keep the door open for funding to be either federal and state, and with that requires us to follow a certain process. So Tierra provides that experience. They are on an on-call for ADOT to do right-of-way acquisition, and they're currently working on right-of-way acquisition on the South Mountain Freeway, Loop 202, which is the largest construction project the state has awarded to date, and it's currently under construction. Last but not least is Patrick Challen. Patrick is also with Matrix, and Patrick offers a tremendous experience and insight into value engineering, and that is something that you don't just talk about, you do in every step and every decision you take, so I'm very thrilled to have him on the team. That team is supported by a cast of supporting staff that is capable of doing a lot of things, from GIS to CAD to project website, should that be necessary, and should we decide to go in that direction, and public outreach and so on. This really brings me to the core of my presentation, and this is really an opportunity to explain to you our approach. As I assembled the proposal to start with that we submitted to the city that got us selected in the first place, our vision all along was to bring experience and a set of skills that will enable us to move this project forward, regardless of what the city council decides to use as a project delivery method, whether it be in design build, or construction management at risk. So because the decision related to project delivery has not been made, and each one of them is unique and require different approach, I decided, along with the team, to break this approach into two phases. Phase one would be project development, and phase two would be project delivery. And during the project development phase, we sought to conduct certain steps that will enable us to make an informed decision regarding the project delivery method. So what you see in front of you, what we proposed and provided a cost estimate for, is a complete set of tasks that, in our professional opinion, necessary and needed and required to move this project from project development phase to project delivery. These tasks are, while they're needed and necessary, do not have to occur all at once. Some can occur concurrently, they can be sequential, and some can be deferred some time down the road, but they're truly necessary to move us forward. The one exception is, as the city manager noted and the city engineer, related to the project delivery method. We felt compelled to include in our scope a thorough analysis to compile and gather information, look at what's been done as far as design and traffic reports and drainage analyses and such, and analyze it in a way that will enable us to determine what is in the best interest of the city to move forward. Our intent is to provide you professional information and enable you to make an informed decision. If that is unnecessary, then obviously it will be eliminated and not included. And you will hear me, excuse me, you'll hear me say it again, but what we provided you is a complete set of services that are comprehensive in nature, and they're based on time and material, and it's not to exceed. The last thing we wanted to do is start with something and then come back and ask for more. So we truly did our best to envision what was needed and to make it comprehensive. The fact that it is time and material, if it's not needed to be done, then we don't get to do it, and we don't invoice you and get paid for it. Our understanding as of this moment is truly clear, and that is reflected in our proposal as well, and that is the city's priorities are really pretty clear and crisp, and that is they come in three parts. And again, you heard city manager address them, city engineer address them. Allow me please to just touch base on them as well. Project needs assessment is the first step. And all, that's really a technical term per se for gathering information, going over what's been done, and looking at the traffic projections that were done to develop this scope of work. You probably know, for example, for the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway, the data that was used and was the basis for the scope today was pre-2007. Our world was really quite different before 2007 rather than after, especially after the 2010-11, after the downturn in the economy. So what we truly want to do is take a look at what's been done and determine, does the traffic of today require that level of service? Does it require that many lanes and so on? What level of service are we attempting to mitigate and to address? The other is and so that will enable us to refine the scope of work and do so from an informed point of view. And then at that point, we can update the cost estimate regardless of what project delivery method we're going to go with. We need a reliable, accurate cost estimate to move forward with. And then last but not least is determining the project delivery method. Again, we have said that we will provide a thorough analysis to inform your decision. We're prepared to do that. If it's not necessary, obviously we won't do it, and we'll move on without it. We clearly understand that this is a vibrant process, and there are a lot of moving elements. So to that end, we fully we are prepared to work with you to tweak the scope, to shuffle items should that be necessary, and to modify it as the project require and as you need to, not as we laid it out, because what we laid out was to envision to the best of our ability. This is going to be quick slide. It may not be needed. This slide is really just intended to explain to you that there are three primary project delivery methods. They're listed here. Design, bid, build is where you design it first and then you advertise it for construction. Construction manager at risk is where the owner hires the designer and the contractor. They marry them literally, and they expect them to work together and design and advance the project to construction. Design build is where the designer and the contractor come together on one team. There's only one contract awarded. It's to the contractor, and the designer is working under the contractor. There's advantages to each one of those, and that's what we would explore with you should that be necessary. This is the fee that we put together. Again, please allow me just a couple of minutes. I'm almost done. I only had a handful of slides. What we have here is a fee estimate that covers the scope as we laid it out. Again, it is based on time and material, and it's not to exceed. And this covers phase one, which is project development, project delivery. Once the decision is made which direction the city would like to go, then that will be scoped appropriately at that time. A design build truly is different, requires a different set of skills and different course of action altogether than perhaps a construction manager at risk or a design bid build. The right-of-way acquisition item, which is the largest on this list, is based on the preliminary need that we need to acquire a right-of-way from 51 parcels. That would be about 25 or half of those at the Rancho Santa Fe Parkway, about 20 of those, or about near 20%, would be for the Santa Rosa extension. About 4 of those parcels would be at the Kingman Crossing, and then 2 for the airway extension. if any decisions are made to, as the city manager alluded to, as we evaluate what's needed today, various segments and whether one segment is required or not, if we do not acquire the right of way, this is based on a per parcel cost, and it covers the whole gamut, from developing right-of-way plans to preparing appraisals and legal descriptions and so on. So what is not needed and doesn't get acquired will not be obviously included in this cost. With that said, I conclude my presentation to you. I will be here for the duration of the study session. I'll be more than happy to come back up and answer any questions. This is to honor the mayor's request in waiting for the questions until the very end. Unless you'd like to do it now, Madam
yeah.
Mayor.
Thank you, Sam. I just want to underscore Sam's last part of his presentation really makes the point about why it's important for this council to make a determination on project scope, because there's no point in doing a lot of these activities for parts of a project that aren't ever going to happen. And so, in case you haven't figured out by now, my big focus tonight is on these three questions about scope and delivery method, and then the financing, which we're going to hear in a minute. So any questions from the mayor or council for Sam before we go to the financing part?
I'd just like to wait.
You're good.
I'm good for now.
You want to wait?
Yeah, well, I think
You wanna
it's
just
great.
keep
We'll all
going
just
and-
wait.
okay.
Yeah, everybody's making
Thank you,
notes.
Sam.
Thank you.
Tina Moline is here to provide some basic information on project financing, and then when Tina's done, we're going to hear from our financial advisor. Tina.
Thank you. Let me pull this up. Okay, so now for the debt financing options for municipal capital projects portion of tonight's session. And good evening, by the way. A busy day for all of us today, huh? There are 6 traditional financing options that are used to fund capital projects. 3 of those are the City of Kingman is very familiar with, and that is the excise tax revenue bonds, improvement district bonds, and our WIFA loans. Stiefel, who will be presenting in just a few moments in the audience, helped us with all of these and played a very big role over the last 10 to 15 years in these 3 types of financing options. Anytime that you want to finance a project, you need to have a funding source identified to pay for that, which you did back in August of last year. You approved a 1% increase in the city's TPT rate, and half of that 1% was dedicated to capital projects. The capital project that's been identified is the I-11 East Kingman Connection project. That 0.5% rate increase is expected to generate $3.1 million during the first year of collections, and I am anticipating a 2.75% growth rate year over year, and that is based on existing taxpayer base, not any sort of increase in our taxpayer base. Skip this slide. So when we look at that 2.75% growth rate, over 1 year, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. This is what it looks like. 2.75% linear trend. We start out at 3.2 next year. By fiscal year 33, it'll be $4.7 million. And by fiscal year 48, in 30 years, it'll be $7 million. But we know that sales tax does not perform this way. It has peaks and it has valleys.
And let's see, I want to get to that other slide real fast because I want to show you what we actually experience.
It's back.
Thank you. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is our general fund, who is the primary recipient of our TPT revenues. And looking at the revenues over the last 20 years, we have an average growth rate of over 3.5%. But when you look at our growth year over year, it is certainly not a linear trend. We have peaks and we have valleys. And it is important that I bring this up when we are talking about the structuring of debt, because we need to meet our annual debt service payments, we need to meet our annual debt service coverages, and we can't depend on a 2.75% rate year over year when we are looking at those figures. So I just wanted to bring that up before I bring up our guests. So identifying our funding source is important. It's also important to look at maybe other funding sources that may be available through grants, through developers, the county, the state, and federal, which we are currently working towards getting a contribution from the state of Arizona. And then property owners, if they're going to benefit from a project, then they should buy into the project as well. And so identifying funding sources, coming up with a financing option, those are important. But the structure of that financing option and the markets and how the markets play a role in all of that is also very important. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Mike LaValle and Mark Reeder, who are both managing partners at Stiefel, who will lead us into that presentation. There you are, sir. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Mayor Gates, members of the council. My name is Mike LaValle, and I'm with Stiefel. My colleague Mark Reeder and I have been working in this business now for about 23 years, and I believe Mark likes to say 30-plus years. Once you go over 30, I guess it's a plus. But anyway, we're thankful to be in front of you tonight. By way of background, our predecessor firm was Stone & Youngberg. So Stone & Youngberg is probably the firm you may recognize, because that was our firm that served the city for many, many years. We were acquired, there was a friendly merger in 2011 and 12 by Stiefel. Stiefel is a 7,000 roughly employee firm nationwide, headquartered in St. Louis. However, the group here in Arizona has been doing the same work in Arizona for 20 or 30 years. So we serve a number of communities such as Kingman. In fact, I know this is too small on the screen here, but we have served since 2002 for the city, starting with the East Golden Gate Improvement District bonds for about $3.5 million. We then assisted the city with a great project for Airway Avenue, which I'll touch on a little bit more and more in depth here in a second. We've also served as financial advisor to the city as it relates to your WIFA loans over the past 2008, 2009, and 11. And then there hasn't been a whole lot of activity since. However, we were also involved in the original Kingman Crossing project, the couple years of meetings to discuss it and to move forward on it. It ultimately didn't go through. But our firm was involved for a couple years. We were also involved in the general obligation bond election in terms of just helping structure numbers. You're going to see some numbers this evening. That's the kind of information we provided on that general obligation bond election for the voter pamphlet ahead of the election. We also assisted the city in moving forward on a refinancing of one of the WIFA loans. Market rates were low. At the time, WIFA had some very flexible prepayment provisions that said that you can call in the loan at any time. They had one statement in there that said at the permission of the board. So we went to the WIFA board, and they originally said that they would look into it, and then they subsequently changed their policy to extend the call provision to about 10 years plus the length of the project, construction project. So instead of being a loan callable at any time, which means you can call it in right away, replace it with new debt at lower rates to save the city money, which was the idea we brought to the city. It would have saved about $750,000 to $1 million, depending on where rates were. WIFA had changed its policy because this was not just a city of Kingman refinancing. This was almost a lot of WIFA loans across the state. All of a sudden became refinanceable. So WIFA had changed their policy around that time in 2010. But we did assist the city, and we had prepared a securities document, and it was pretty close to selling bonds before that all changed. Anyway, so we have been serving the city for quite some time. By way of background as well, we also are just about everywhere in the state. We cover a lot of middle market cities and towns, school districts, pretty much most of the issuers in Mojave County, including the county, City of Kingman, obviously, Bullhead City, Lake Havasu City, Bullhead City Fire District. I'm assisting them right now with a bond sale. They passed their election in November, and most of the school districts in the county as well. So we're here quite a bit. In Arizona, last year we were the #1 ranked firm by number of issues and by the size of the par amount. That's meaningful to you because we see a lot of transactions statewide. We see a lot of economic development projects. One of the reasons why Mark Reeder is partnering with me on this particular transaction, this is more of an economic development type transaction, and he's really an expert. A lot of his clients, including the town of Marana, which you'll hear about, who's right along the I-10 there, so he has that requisite expertise, and so he and I are partnering on this one. We're also #1 in land secured finance nationwide. We do more land secured finance than any other firm across the country. What is that? That's your improvement district type bonds, your community facilities district type bonds. They're named something else in different states. Mello-Roos in California, and TIF financings, tax increment financings, redevelopment type financings all across the country. So we see a lot of activity. We're looking at those kinds of structures and getting ideas and seeing how we can apply it in Arizona. And now I'm going to pivot to a brief financial markets overview, give you an idea of what's been going on the last several months. You've probably been seeing mostly the stock market volatility. In fact, this week it was down 300-ish, and then today it was up over 100 points. As you know, behind the scenes, the FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, plans to have 3 rate hikes, most likely, for the next this year. In fact, they're meeting today and tomorrow, and there's 100%, at least the economists and all the folks out there, about 100% certainty that they're going to raise rates at least gradually, 0.25% tomorrow. And so we're in this sort of rising interest rate, but gradual rising interest rate environment. Now, last year, what did that do? That brought up short-term rates. When the Fed started to pull back from quantitative easing and all of a sudden starting to raise rates, but gradually, short-term rates last year went up. Long-term rates did not go up, they kind of held steady. So you had a flattening of the yield curve, if you will. The yield curve is usually like this, short-term, long-term, and then you had a little bit of a flattening because short-term rates. This year, however, those short-term rates have kind of stayed at the higher levels, and now long-term rates are starting to go up. So we've seen a lot of volatility. This slide here, the bottom right corner, speaks to January through March alone. You can see the 2-year rate is already a little bit higher than it was, obviously, over a year and a half ago, but it's been holding constant. However, the 10-year rate is up about 45, 46 basis points, 0.5%, let's call it. 30-year rate is also up about 0.5%, just since January this year. It hits home when you see this. This is the 30-year municipal market data, AAA rate, since January 1 of 2015. But you can see since September of 17 where that 30-year rate has been, it's kind of been in a certain range, and then all of a sudden it's jumped up since January of 18. So long-term rates have trended up in the last several months. Now, why is that meaningful to you? Well, we wanted to kind of come up and explain our estimated interest rate. And we're going to be showing you 2 major scenarios, several scenarios, but 2 different rates, depending on the type of pledged security in our analyses. The first one will be if you pledge your full excise taxes, and I'll go into what that means. And we're going to use a rate in our analysis of 4.3%. Now, that has some cushion in it. Again, rates are trending up, but we do not know where they're going to be 6 months from now or a year from now. Will they still be trending up? Will they hold firm? Will they be slightly lower? We do not know. But since they have been trending up over the last several months, we are using 4.3%. But how we kind of got to that is columns 1 through 7. Column 2 is the AAA market. We get that released every day. And if you're a AAA issuer, those are the estimated yields, overall borrowing costs to a AAA rated issuer. And those are released daily. Everything else trades at a spread to the AAA market. So if you're a AA versus a single A or a triple B issuer, everything has a credit spread. And in the case of one of our scenarios, which is an excise tax pledge scenario, which I will discuss later, our underwriter gave us estimated credit spreads, assuming a AA minus rating. The district or the city has a AA minus rating currently on its current outstanding excise tax bonds. And that credit spread ranges from 0.16 to 0.50 out over 30 years. We also factored in an additional spread of 15 basis points all the way down. That's just our attempt at being somewhat conservative. Our goal is not to show you an aggressive rate. Our goal is to just show you a rate, show you some numbers, and show you what that means and what that looks like on paper. Obviously, if we were pricing bonds 2 or 3 weeks from now, I could show you an estimated rate lower than 4.3, but since we're talking about something in the future, whether it's August, October, or next year in terms of a bond issue, we use a little bit of a higher rate. So the total estimated credit spread is the combination of column 3 and 4, and then the total estimated yield estimate is in column 6, which is columns 2 plus 5. So you can see the yields range from 1.8 to 3.72. We'll get into discussion much closer to pricing bonds about premium bonds, couponing, adding it. But typically, right now in this marketplace, and this can change, rates. Our underwriters typically use 4 to 5% coupons out long to attract the right kind of buyers. The goal is to drive that yield down. In order to do that, you want to give investors what they want, which is typically 4% or 5% coupons. Well, those have different yield to maturities out past year 10, which is column 7. So you can see an estimated yield of 1.82 on the short end, and then if you look at column 7, going out to about 4.42% right now. That's how we kind of came up with 4.3. It also includes the cost, the true interest cost. It factors in the estimated cost of issuance as well. So again, AA minus credit rating. We do not factor in bond insurance on this particular scenario. Bond insurance is when you pay a premium today, and then you can sell at the insurer's rating. The insurers right now, there aren't any AAA anymore. They went away with the recession. There's only AA. Well, AA is only one notch higher than AA minus. And so we would, as we got closer to pricing down the road, calculate that cost benefit of whether insurance even made sense. But for now, we're not assuming insurance. We don't think it makes sense, not right now in this market. So 4.3% is what we're going to use on a pledged excise tax bond. Now on scenario 2, same data, except if you're only pledging your half-cent sales tax, the revenue that was just passed that you plan to intend to repay the debt, then that is less secure. It's not your full excise taxes, it's just your half cent. Again, I'll dive into that a little bit later. We're assuming a rating of an A credit rating. That's 2 notches lower than AA minus. There'd be AA minus, then A plus, then A. So we're going 2 notches lower, and because of that, the interest rate is slightly higher, okay? We are also assuming bond insurance on this scenario because at the A level, it's most likely beneficial to buy bond insurance, pay the premium at the time of the bond sale, and then sell at AA insured rates, okay? So the 4.45 bakes into the cost of issuance plus that insurance premium as well. But so we're talking about 4.3% to 4.45% money. And that is what, at least if we were pricing today, would be a more conservative rate. You get something lower than that today. But again, we're thinking about things out into the future. Okay, so that's the rates. Now let's talk about the financing alternatives. We already understand the project. In fact, we got a lot more this evening, thanks to the engineers. So I will skip this one. In terms of Kingman Crossing, Rancho Santa Fe, the estimated cost being $85 to $110 million. We know the revenue stream is using the half-cent sales tax. The financing alternatives, to start, I'm not going to go through all line by line, but the first row highlighted in orange is streets and roads. And as Ms. Moline mentioned, there's several different ways of financing streets and roads, but for a project this size, the viable ones for the city are revenue bonds, either excise tax or sales tax, which is that first orange box, or improvement district bonds, CFD bonds, or a combination of the three. And so we're going to touch on those this evening between myself covering the sales tax and excise tax, and then my colleague Mark Reeder jumping in on the improvement district and CFD bonds. First and foremost, I said I'd come back to this, a great public-private partnership, if you will, with the city was the Kingman Airway Avenue Railroad Crossing Improvement District and the city's excise tax deal. The city came to terms with landowners about building, as you know, the underpass underneath the BNSF Railroad. The landowners that benefited from that accepted a percentage of the cost, and the city accepted their percentage of the cost. So the city did a excise tax transaction in 2005 for about $2.8 million, which is on the next slide, but we also did an improvement district. And the improvement district, with an assessment on the land of 1,677 acres, funded about $6.3 million deal. It funded about 55, 60, 70% of the project. The city's portion was about $2.8 million of the project. So we sold two bond issues separately, but they went towards the same project. The city's portion and then the landowner's portion. So I'm going to dive into excise taxes here, and I'll speak to the city's current excise tax pledge debt. You have these 2005 issues. You only have a couple payments left. Your covenants on these, well, if you look, the total debt service was pretty small because it was only a $2.8 million deal. Your revenues, your excise tax revenues, which I'll describe in a minute here, were at the time $16.9 million. So your coverage back then was in the 60 times coverage. So you had very good coverage, more than most deals. But when we established covenants back then, which is in the green box, 2.5 times principal and interest due in the current fiscal year. That's the minimum debt service coverage that we established. Any new bonds into the future couldn't cause your coverage to go lower than 2.5 times as well. That's essentially the revenues divided by the debt service cannot be less than 2.5 times. Okay? Reserve fund, we did not fund a reserve fund. What we said was if coverage ever fell below 3 times, your revenues ever dropped and coverage fell below 3 times, then you'd be required to fund a reserve fund. And that was sufficient enough for the rating agencies at the time to give you an A credit rating. You have since been upgraded to a AA minus on these bonds over the years. Okay, so now you're a AA minus, and what does that mean? This slide just shows a AA minus for Standard & Poor's, and then Fitch, you actually have a AA. I apologize, it should be AA stable in the right-hand box. The rationale from Standard & Poor's says the rating reflects our view of the city's very strong combined maximum annual debt service coverage of more than 20 times, good legal provisions, including a closed senior lien and 2.5 times bond test, so they like the 2.5 times bond test, and solid economy. And this is a recent report about last year. Their outlook, however, says they will keep it stable as long as your coverage remains high. Due to very strong coverage levels, we do not anticipate lowering the rating over the next 2 years unless the city issues a significant amount of parity debt. So and that's typical of any bond issue. Obviously, if you're going to look at one of these large projects, the rating could be pressured. And so when we're talking about financing alternatives and looking at debt financings, you want to think about how aggressive you go versus how conservative you go on the financing. And, it could mean a different rating. It could mean instead of a AA minus, it could mean an A plus or an A. So we'll be talking about that here as well. Okay, on your excise taxes, I said I would get to that. Here is a history of your excise taxes. Your excise tax buckets are made up of your sales and use tax, which is where that half-cent sales tax falls into, State shared sales tax, state revenue sharing, fines and forfeitures, franchise fees, and licenses and permits. Those are the buckets that are pledged towards your outstanding excise taxes, excise tax deal, okay? You can see over the last 10 years how it's grown and went down with the recession, but ever since then grown. The 10-year average is 3%. That's the graph I'm looking at the bottom there. I'll also point out that your current projected 18-19 excise taxes include that full funding of the half cent, that 3.1 million that Ms. Moline mentioned. So your excise taxes are projected to be around 29.1 million for next year. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to show you two scenarios. Really quite a few more scenarios, but two major scenarios. One, pledging your full excise taxes. That's these bucket, all of these funds. Okay, not just the half cent, but your full excise taxes like your last bond issue. Scenario 2 in the green there is pledging just your half cent sales tax. And we're going to talk about the differences depending on, and then underneath each scenario, scenario 1 and 2, you have two different columns here, and you can kind of circle 1A and 1B as being the more aggressive approach, and 1C and 1D is more of the more conservative. It's on sort of a spectrum here. And there's more scenarios that we can run, and as we get closer, we're working with the financing team and the council to come up with the appropriate sizing. These are just ideas for now. Again, 2A and 2B would be the more aggressive approach to the half cent sales tax pledge, and then 2C and 2D would be the more conservative approach. And I'll touch on what that means in the next several slides. This is just speaking to bond proceeds and the sources. We understand there are other potential sources out there, including a city cash contribution. If let's say we get around to doing a bond sale in the fall or early spring of next year, you have been collecting your half cent sales tax up until that point. You might be able to contribute, it's an option for the city to contribute some of that money that you've been banking towards funding this project, or not. That's just an option. And so that's to be determined. We have in here a line called gap financing. And that's where we get into discussions on improvement districts and CFD financings. And that's where my colleague Mark Reeder will be coming in towards the end of this presentation. Other contributions include contributions from landowners, either in cash up front or, again, it could be part of the gap financing combination. And then this ADOT 5-year plan pre-funding concept that has been done in the past. We'll discuss that as well. Now, what do each of these scenarios fund? Well, there's a project fund, and these are just estimates for now. There's a project fund, depending on the scenario. There's estimated delivery date expenses. That would be underwriting fees, bond counsel, underwriters counsel, rating agency fees, insurance company. The insurance fees would not be in the first scenario because we're not assuming insurance, but they would be in the second scenario. So that's why the second scenario has higher fees, is because of the insurance costs. But anyway, so again, it's all an estimate at this point, but this is what we estimate in terms of fees if we complete a transaction. Capitalized interest is not anticipated at this time. Typically, you do capitalized interest if you sell bonds and you don't have a funding mechanism in place for a few months. And so you pay for the first interest payment, as an example, with bond proceeds. But since you have that half cent dedicated revenue in there already, we're not anticipating that, although that's something that can be discussed. And then a debt service reserve fund, not anticipated on scenario 1, mainly because if you pledge your excise tax revenues, you'll have pretty good coverage still. Not like your old deal, because that was only a $2.8 million deal, but you will have pretty good coverage. I don't think we would approach the rating agency with a reserve fund. However, on scenario 2, that's to be determined. There is a likelihood that a reserve fund may be needed, or at least a surety bond. You can pay an insurance company to cover a reserve fund. So those are the types of sources and uses that we're looking at. In the footnotes there, in the boxes, we'll also mention down the road, again, the project funds do not include investment earnings. In those boxes in footnote B, we're kind of just showing you how investment earnings can play into this, where if you have a scheduled draw schedule over a 3-year period, as an example, and I just picked these numbers, you spend $15 million right off the bat, then 11 million, 3 months later or 6 months later, and then, so every 6 months you're drawing down 11 to 10 million bucks of your project. If you're earning 2% interest on the money you haven't spent yet, you might have an extra 1.7 million, 1.3 million, just depends on how much you're borrowing and how much is remaining before you spend it on your construction dollars. So we can take into account investment earnings to apply towards the projects as well. But that's something that we'll do down the road as we get closer to the pricing. Okay, so let me describe the scenarios for you, and I might come back to this page when I summarize. This first scenario, 1A, is what we call an escalating debt service structure. We understand that you're going to repay your debt. We understand you're going to repay your debt with that TPT, with that half-cent sales tax. We're using the 2.75% growth in that sales tax. That's columns 2 and 3. Okay, so growing that over 30 years. Going from left to right is the principal and interest. Remember, we're using 4.3% for this if you're pledging your full excise taxes. This produces, and if we're sizing the bonds in column 6, the debt service, to match the half-cent sales tax estimated growth, okay, you can raise about $75.6 million, which produces about $74.5 million towards the project. Now, that is assuming that you have 2.75% growth for the life of the project. And as Ms. Moline mentioned, you'll be up and down, most likely, over time. So, but the coverage you'll see in columns 8 and 9, coverage is based on your most recent excise tax revenues. And I mentioned that 29.1 million, that factors in the 3 million of TPT, and then all your excise taxes, all those buckets I mentioned. So the coverage then in column 9 is this is what you're pledging towards the transaction, would be the lowest one. It would be maximum annual debt service, okay, which is that final year, because we're growing the debt service over time in this scenario. And so you'd have 4.2 times coverage. That's at the bottom of column 9, okay? This is one scenario. Scenario 1B shows if you did sell the 75.6 million. Okay. If you did sell the $75.6 million, but then the growth wasn't there. Let's say your growth changed to 2%. So you can see in column 3, the only thing we changed is in column 3, it went from 2.75% growth to 2%. But you've already sold $75.6 million 5 years earlier. You can see how the revenues would not be available, would not be there to cover the debt service for $75.6 million. So you'd have a shortage in columns 10. Okay? So that's showing more of a sensitivity analysis of projected revenues. The next scenario shows escalating debt service, but only for 8 years. So we grow it for a few years, and I picked 8 years. It could be 5, it could be 10. It's really council and staff, when we're all working together on this over time. We grow the debt service in column 6 following the half-cent sales tax, but then after 8 years, we level it out. You see level debt service in column 6 thereafter, less than $4 million a year. So we flatten out the debt service, and therefore, you have a smaller deal because you're not growing with the growing TPT revenues. Okay, so it's now a $64 million deal, which brings in less project funds, but this is what we would call a more conservative structure. Then you can see how in column 10, if you continue to grow at 275, you'll have excess cash from your TPT that you can apply, you can build up, you can use it as a reserve, a rate stabilization or whatnot to make debt payments in the event of a downturn. Okay, that's scenarios one, and then this is the last scenario from excise tax pledges. This is, again, a sensitivity example where we drop the percentage growth from 2.75 down to 2%. And you can see, but since we've flattened out the debt service in column 6 to less than $4 million a year, you can see here how this is the more conservative structure. But again, you get less in bond proceeds. So really, it's about working together as we go forward on what's the appropriate structure based on a lot of variables. The last 4 scenarios are the same as the first, except we're pledging only your half-cent TPT. That's your cash flow, and that's your pledge. And if that's your pledge, then you're not pledging your full excise taxes, okay? So that's now a single A rated transaction, okay, not double A minus, so your rate is 4.45%. And because of that, we're going to establish a coverage on that TP half-cent sales tax of roughly 1.2 times. And I said we are going to establish, we're going to talk to the rating agencies, but it's going to be something higher than 1 times coverage. So because of it not being 1-time coverage, meaning you can't match cash flows exactly, this scenario brings in only $62 million. And if you stress test it with growth going down from 2.75 in column 3 down to 2%, you can see there's going to be a shortfall in years later, just pledging the TPT only. The last 2 scenarios of this is the more conservative structure where we're only growing the debt service in column 6, 8 years, and then we're levelizing it thereafter at 3.2 million, again to meet 1.2 times coverage minimally, okay? So that brings in project funds of roughly 50.5 million, okay? And then the stress test on that with a 2.75 going down actually shows that everything's okay and you might be able to do a cash buildup. So that just shows the variables. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Mark Reeder, who will spend the next 5 or 7 minutes here on other potential sources of revenue. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. Mark Reeder, thanks for having us up. I've got about 5 minutes. As Mike shared with you, there's a lot of analysis going on in terms of how the debt's going to be structured, as he mentioned, and the type of revenue growth you want in your model. The engineers are obviously working very hard on the scope of the project and the project budget. Right now, somewhere between 85 and 110 million. Sounds like you're going to be working hard on trying to get better numbers, if you will, in terms of your projects, which will change all of this, okay? One of the things I wanted to spend just a few minutes on is, to the extent that there is additional, what we call capital stacks or additional funding options available that you may need to finish out the project, I just wanted to spend just a few minutes with you on some of the case studies. This is not coming down here, so I don't know. Page down? Coming down? It's not coming down on the page down here. It's down this one right here. Oh, page down. Basically, at the end of the day, as mentioned, if you have private property owners that are also going to benefit from this interchange, there's some pretty interesting options that we might have available to us to incorporate them into the financing. We talked about improvement districts and we talked about community facilities districts. So this is a case study of an improvement district we just did up in Bullhead City, where the private property owners would benefit from a road expansion project up there. It was about $5.3 million. They were going to benefit from the public infrastructure, and like you did with the Kingman Crossing project, the city sponsored improvement district. Basically, the capital costs are allocated back to the property owners who benefit from the public infrastructure. And the improvement district is a great public-private partnership to potentially fill that gap. It's a type of a financing we have to be very, very careful of, because at the end of the day, while we structure these things very conservatively, the town's general fund is on the hook. So if we do a gap financing, if you will, with a city improvement district, we'll be very careful and very prudent on how we come together with that potential source of money. The other thing other option that you have that we've talked about really is a community facilities district, very similar to an improvement district, where we can get the private sector who would benefit from the public infrastructure to come in and help pay for some of the capital costs and pay their fair share of capital costs. We can get into the details of the CFDs later. I think in our experience, whenever we have worked on an interchange, to be honest with you, we've had some pretty significant and exciting results from interchanges. I think if they're done properly, over the years, we've seen interchanges built, and after it's built, there is significant economic development benefits associated with the city or for the city, and so we can share some examples with you on that. This is one down in Tucson, which is the Twin Peaks interchange that was just built. You may have driven by it. It was a project funded by the city. the RTA, the feds, and ADOT. And after this project was done, there were some significant economic development projects that were constructed around the interchange there. So I think I'm out of time. Sorry I had to kind of rush through that. I know we have limited time this evening, but wanted to share with you really kind of some ideas in the event there's a need to do what we call a gap financing to fill the buckets up. Thank you.
Questions? Is there questions? Councilmember Lincoln Felter, did you have a question?
Just in general, or did you want to make a statement first, Mr. Bacon?
No,
or-
I'm fine. Just a question in general or a question in specific, we'd be glad to try to answer.
Okay. Well, thank you all for all the speakers. If I may, Madam Mayor, the financial discussion, I think, and also the conversation about the scope. I think the financial discussion at this point, it's obviously purely academic. The scope is really the next step, because the dollar amount we're going to be talking about financing is going to be based solely upon that. When I look at all of the sections, I mean, there are essential sections that we're going to absolutely have to include in this project to accomplish the improved access north-south and public safety benefit and all those things. And then there's a lot of non-essential sections and components as well. I mean, looking at the Kingman Crossing Boulevard, I noticed that down at Louise and at Southern, there are 2 roundabouts that are included, to what I understand to be around $8 million or so. And correct me if I'm wrong, if those amounts are wrong. There's also a lot of non-essential infrastructure that we don't need. At least on the Rancho Santa Fe Drive portion, at least like $11 million worth of non-essential infrastructure that I would hope we would be able to push off in through like a community facilities district or some other sort of a private mechanism. So I really see the scoping exercise with staff, with yourself, to be critical before we go any farther, to really nail down what that scope of work is going to be. I appreciate Matrix and putting that proposal together, but again, both the duration of the draft scope and the dollar amount of that proposed scope was based upon, kind of like it, for lack of a better word, everything but the kitchen sink. And I understand why they did that. So I think that when you compare the request for qualifications for program management services compared to the scope that we were all provided, it's far more comprehensive, and I'd hope that they would, after the scoping meeting and after we decide on a project delivery method, be able to revise their scope pretty dramatically. And then the fee would be reflected in that.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingenfelder, members of council. Real quickly, I think you got the data transposed on the roundabouts. The roundabouts are about $2 million on an $8 million segment.
Got it.
But as it relates to scope, and I think Sam said this in his comments earlier tonight, we would be glad to have Greg and Sam work together to, if you will, package the portions of his proposal that relate to updating and evaluating the cost and the segments so that we could go about the business of scoping this project and then do the other things that you mentioned in your comments. I won't repeat those, but that's what I call the smaller part of that.
Yeah.
And leave to a second phase, if you will, the question about right-of-way acquisition and those other larger items, because as he also said, what happens with scoping is going to affect those items. And so I think I had a conversation with Sam earlier today. I think he's comfortable with that idea, and he and Greg can hopefully get that worked out and have an item in front of you 2 weeks from tonight.
May I ask you one more assumption in the scope right now? Am I assuming correctly that the Kingman Crossing Boulevard from Southern to all the way up to Airway, is that currently included as like a 5-lane?
Correct.
Divided?
Correct.
And really, we only need 2 lanes.
Well, but that goes, again, I hate to be redundant.
Yeah.
Right, on this, but it's the same perspectives I just offered. That's part of what the scoping exercise is about.
Exactly.
That we being the city engineer and his staff, and Sam and his team, would identify those segments that could either be eliminated, changed in the cross-section, or phased for future development, and using updated numbers. That way we have a common set of data that we're working with, and it helps us to get to an idea of what the project cost looks like, helps us to get to an idea of what the actual scope of this project is. Actually, I'm full circle back to my opening comments, which is that we need to address scope and vehicle to do this project, and then the financing. Financing can take a while to get to. I think the scoping and the delivery system are ahead of that. The only question I would have back for the council is, and Sam said this several times tonight, the proposal he gave, which in his opinion is consistent with what he was asked to do as a respondent, was to evaluate the 3 alternatives. It's a relatively small amount of money, but it is an amount of money. If this council's already decided that they want to do one method of delivery, as I think Sam also said, just tell us, and that takes care of another item on the agenda. Vice Mayor Miles.
Well, I know this is a work session, and we're not going to take a vote tonight, but I want to just say how glad I am to have Matrix and the team that is assembled here working with us, because I feel like we have the expertise we need. We've been talking about this a long, long time. I feel like I could see these maps in my sleep of all these connector roads and everything. Certainly not my expertise, but we've also had the discussion on the alternative methods for
Yes.
quite a while now. And I remember even a year ago I think we came to kind of a consensus that we certainly didn't want the linear approach taken. So we were really going to look in CMAR and design build, but that discussion continued, and my research continued. And for myself, I know that I'm satisfied that the discussion we've had has led me to believe that we could go ahead and make a decision, maybe, I can speak for myself, toward these methods and selecting the design build, because I think that's one that I could support at this point.
May I ask, is there any opportunity that we could at least see some pros and cons? Nothing terribly detailed, but just that we can look at the different methods?
There's material available in a number of sites, and I'm sure between Greg and Sam, I'm just looking to see their heads nod. We can provide that. There they go. So we can provide that. In response to Vice Mayor Miles, we appreciate your perspective on voting, but the direction would be that you're asking that what staff presents 2 weeks from now include design build as part of that. That's really what you were saying.
Any other questions of staff? Anyone? Did you have anything before?
Yeah, if I may. I would support Vice Mayor's thoughts on that. Having worked for the City of Tucson, I actually did the City of Tucson's first ever design build. I came in 2004 on this facility, which was design build. I was the project manager of the jail, which was also design build. I have experience with that method. I think it's a really good method to deliver a very high-profile, large, high-dollar project, just from my experience. And I would lean towards design-build project delivery method for the I-11 project myself.
Anyone else? Go ahead. Can we close the work session at this time?
I
or
was
do you
going to
have any
say,
final comments?
I have no intention of going to the second item tonight. We will reschedule that. And I appreciate your attention to the last 90 minutes of discussion on the I-11 project. I know you guys all had a busy day. And thanks to the team for their extensive work to give you the information that you received tonight.
A lot of valuable information. It's much
Yeah,
appreciated.
I think Councilmember Lingenfelder has a quick comment, and I have
Okay.
a closer.
Yes, just so everybody, including the council, knows, so the next step, and can we meet to evaluate all of the components and decide upon what the scope is going to include? Because that is really going to eliminate a lot of the confusion right now.
Well, I appreciate that. What we envision is that in 2 weeks, there'll be an action request of the council to have Matrix officially under contract. We have an engagement letter with Stiefel, but we don't have a comparable document for Matrix. So that would be the next step. And then as we envision it, as soon as the city staff and Matrix staff can generate those cost elements and evaluate that for you, then we'd have the discussion among the full council to say, yeah, we don't want to do this part. We want to do half of that other part, and then that would get you definitionally to two things concurrently, a scope and a project estimated cost. So that's how we envision it. If you have a different thought process, I mean, we are obviously interested in hearing what that is.
So just to clarify, we're not going to be asked in 2 weeks to approve the time and dollar amount?
That you saw
That we
in
saw
tonight's
this evening.
material. No,
That's not-
That's not my expectation.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Thanks again for your time and attention.
No, well, thank you. And so we will go ahead and have the discussion on possible annexation areas at a
Yeah,
future date.
I will reschedule that. My closing comments are two. The first is that some of the information that you saw tonight, especially Greg's on the history, it's our intention to put on the city's website so that anybody who wants to learn about the history of these projects can. And secondly, that staff has been engaged with both the school district and the state of Arizona about the potential annexation of Kingman High School, which is the subject that we will reschedule from tonight's meeting. So thank you, Mayor, members of council. I think we're ready to convene the regular business meeting.
Thank you very much. We'll call this regular meeting of the Common Council to order at 7:07. No need for roll call. We're all still here. The invocation this evening will be given by Chaplain Denny Colvig. Kindly stand for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let me preface the prayer by saying that I understand and can sense the scope of your responsibilities, and I want to open our prayer by reading a prayer by Peter Marshall, chaplain of the U.S. Senate back in the late 40s, and then conclude that with my specific request for you and the meeting tonight. Shall we pray? We thank thee, our Father in heaven, for this sacred moment when our hearts may be united in prayer and forgetting all else except our need for your guidance and help, we may reach up to you as thou art reaching down to us. Let us not see the beauty of this day or the glow of good health only, but let us present ourselves to you, not in a false reliance, but in your strength alone. You have given us every good thing. You have given us life itself with whatever talents we possess and the time and the opportunity to use them. May we use them wisely. May we use them in your strength. Deliver us from the error of asking and expecting your blessing and your guidance in our public lives while closing the doors to you in our private lives. And Lord God, tonight, we bring to you the City Council and related persons. We ask that you give clarity of understanding regarding the issues, clarity of understanding regarding the priorities, wise decision-making, overall wisdom, passion rightly directed, all following your teachings and principles. And help us to defer to the position of servanthood and to the welfare of our Kingman citizens. We ask your help and your strength with thanksgiving. In our Lord's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chaplain. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. The council may go into executive session for legal counsel in accordance with ARS 38-451-03A3 to discuss any agenda item. The following items may be discussed, considered, and decisions made relating thereto. Item number 1, approval of minutes. Item A, work session meeting minutes of February 24th, 2018. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Item 1B, regular meeting minutes of March 6th, 2018. Any changes, corrections, or additions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item 2, this evening we were prepared to recognize the Mojave County Search and Rescue and Mojave County Sheriff's Office deputies for their heroic events during the tragic events in the Grand Canyon accident on February 10th and 11th. Unfortunately, members of the group were unable to participate this evening, so Councilmember David Wade and myself will be making a presentation awarding plaques to this heroic group on Thursday, April 5th at 7 p.m. at the Sheriff's Department. Item 3, call to the public, comments from the public. Those wishing to address the council should fill out request forms in advance. Action taken as a result of public comments will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or rescheduling the matter for consideration and decision at a later time. Comments from the public will be restricted to items not on the agenda with the exception of those on the consent agenda. There will be no comments allowed that advertise for a particular person or group. Comments should be limited to no longer than 3 minutes. We have one person so far signed up to address the council this evening, Jem Morgaine.
Thank you. The tiny piece of property I bought here in Kingman is the first piece of real estate that I have ever owned. Kingman isn't just where I live, it's where I'm building my home and establishing roots for the very first time in my life. During this past year of local activism, I've experienced a disheartening reality about community relations here in Kingman. People are afraid. They're afraid to speak up for what they believe in or participate in locally unpopular events. They're afraid for their personal safety if they do participate. They're afraid of what it might mean for them if their boss or co-workers were to see them, or how it might affect their local business or community projects they're involved in. The fear is valid, justified by the reality of living in a Mojave County community. And perhaps for those who were born and raised in this community, it's all they've known, so they just accept it for what it is, with both sides finding nothing wrong with excluding the opposition, no longer even willing to hear what the other side has to say. For me, this is shocking. I've never lived in a community so entrenched in this kind of divisive discord and unwillingness to include all voices in conversations about issues that affect everyone equally in a community. After the last city council meeting, I asked Mayor Gates about which commission would be the right commission to address the issue of community relations, to find solutions for creating a more tolerant and inclusive community. I understand that the commissions are undergoing revision of mission statements, so that most likely remains a work in progress. So tonight I'm here with a personal request of the City Council. This Saturday, a group of local activists have organized a March for Our Lives event to have a genuine conversation about school safety in our community. There are, of course, other communities using this event as a platform for various anti-positions, but this event is not. In fact, there are those within the organizing group who are gun owners. I'm inviting the council members to step up as role models to show what it means to participate as a tolerant and inclusive member of the community, irrespective of political affiliation or personal beliefs. Even if you don't want to participate in the march, please show up for the pre-march conversation at Locomotive Park at 3 p.m. because that fear that may be gripping your heart right now, the fear of how you personally might be affected if you were to show up to this community event, is exactly why it's so important that you do. Please help us to create the kind of real conversations that we need to have if we're ever going to bridge this heartbreaking divide within our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else in the audience wish to address the council at this time? Please approach. Just take. Oh, that's all right. You can break it up when you're done. Okay. That's fine. If you'd kindly state your name for the record, please.
Yes. My name is Susan Collins. I'm a recent resident of Kingman. I moved here in July of 2016 to take the position of general music teacher at Manzanita Elementary School. I'm completely committed to living in Kingman and working at Manzanita long term. My mom moved here in November of 2016, and we both have purchased homes. Last summer, I joined the Arizona Hope Street Teacher Fellowship in an effort to engage policymakers and bring the voice of educators to the table. Through this fellowship, I have learned to advocate for better schools through a solutions-based approach. The Save Our Schools referendum caught my attention last summer as they worked to gain signatures to refer Senate Bill 1431 to public vote. This bill, which would expand the use of educational savings accounts, was passed by the legislature and signed by Governor Ducey. How does this affect Kingman? It takes more money out of the state education fund, thus reducing the funds available to every district in the state. The reality is that Arizona schools have taken huge cuts in funding coming from the state level, and this affects our local district's ability to recruit and retain quality education professionals. Strong schools are a foundational component to building a strong community. In order to attract industry and manufacturing, we must have strong schools. Not only do they need a strong workforce, their managers need places where they can educate their families, and businesses will not move to a place where their managers will not live. Despite the strength of the referendum, the Arizona legislature and Governor Ducey continue to propose legislation that cuts funding. There are bills in process that expand tax credits, cut funding to school district transportation, and more. Through the frustration of Arizona teachers, the Red for Ed movement was started. Public education supporters are encouraged to wear red on Wednesdays to show solidarity. On Wednesday, March 28th, the Arizona Day of Action has been set aside as a day to show solidarity across our state. 10 peaceful demonstrations are being planned everywhere from the Capitol lawn to rural communities. And we are planning one here in Kingman at the Safeway that is south of Interstate 40. We plan to wear red and hold signs that support strong public education. The objective is to show a spirit of solidarity and support for public schools across our state. I realize this is a huge issue with no simple or easy answers. I'm not trying to change the world, just my little corner of it. I moved to Kingman because I wanted to. I teach because I have a passion for it, and I believe that I can touch the future that way and make a difference. I plan to retire in Kingman. I want to see our community grow and prosper. Strong public schools are the foundation for making that happen. Please stand with us to show our state government that we want strong schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you kindly share your contact information with the city clerk, and we'll be in touch? Thank you. Does anyone else in the audience wish to address the council at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed here are considered to be routine by the city council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Does any member of council wish to have any item on the consent agenda pulled for discussion? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have, under item 5, we have no old business this evening, nor do we have any new business this evening. Are there any department reports?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, announcements by mayor, council members, and city manager. We'll start to the right. Councilmember Kress?
Nothing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lincolnfelter?
Yes, thank you. Last Friday, John Hanson, the president of CAMA, and myself went down to Sahuarita, south of Tucson, to present testimony to the Arizona Department of Transportation board related to the Interstate 11 projects. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yesterday, I attended the Manufacturing Association, CAMA's meeting, and I'm glad to report that there was a vibrant discussion on workforce development in our city. Members of the college, the JTED, and the Arizona at Work career group were there, and the college announced that they were expanding their electrical program, and I was very happy to hear that because that's one of our in-demand trades. There was also a very good discussion of potential developments, and several developers were there discussing the opportunity that they see in Kingman for major development, especially now that we are considering our infrastructure and moving forward with that. So it was a very positive meeting and well attended.
Thank you very much. I was recently asked if I would be interested in participating in a project known as the Mayor's Challenge to End Homelessness for Veterans. So I did have an initial meeting with the interested parties, and it does appear to be that there is a great deal of community support for this initiative. And moving forward, I guess I'm kind of segueing into the next item. This might be a topic that we could have a work session discussion on. Is this a viable goal for our city and for our homeless veterans? So, nothing this evening. Councilmember Wade? Nothing.
Just
Staley?
very quickly, on Sunday, I'll be traveling to Kansas City to attend the National Main Street Conference, and I'm really looking forward to bringing information back to the city to help us further our Main Street program and help with downtown revitalization.
Anything? I guess one comment. I look out and I see our 4 candidates for city manager in the audience this evening. We appreciate you all being here, and thank you for considering the city of Kingman. Any other discussion? No. Seeing none, we do have, council requests for future work session, agenda items, and/or calendar adjustments. Anything? We'll start back over.
No, not this evening. Thank you.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, moving on. Anyone? Okay, thank you so much. So we do have need for an executive session this evening for discussion of land sale lease. The city attorney requests that the council go into executive session to discuss legal matters involving the sale or lease of real properties owned by the city of Kingman. I believe we have 2 items we need to discuss this evening, city manager. One is discussion on possible direction to sell, lease real property owned by the city of Kingman, and discussion and possibly provide direction and/or approve lease agreement with Fleischman AZ Investment Corporation for the lease of the city's parking lot on 3rd and Andy Devine Avenue. Is that accurate, sir?
It is.
Okay. Thank you very much. Having said that, I'll entertain a motion that we move to executive session at this time.
I'll make a motion that we move to executive session.
Second that.
Any discussion? No. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. This should be a short session. We're returning to open session. We need to hear from the Deputy City Attorney.
Okay, on the Kingman Airport Authority, it's my understanding Carl is going to continue updating you folks. I don't have any new information at this time. When I talked to Carl, he didn't have any new information to pass on to me, to pass on to you. So I would just expect future updates.
Thank you very much. Having said that, there is no need for an executive session, as the city attorney is the one that schedules and recommends an executive session.
Well, it's
So-
on the
All due
agenda.
respect, it's on the agenda, and I move that we enter executive session for a KA litigation update, in that our counsel or vendor for such litigation is present.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We'll return to open session at 8:22. There's been no action necessary. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.